Thank you very much. Very happy to be here today talking about a very, very important subject. My name is Karl Longley. I've many years, since 1982, associated with Fresno State. I retired at the end of '04 as the Dean of the College of Engineering and Computer Sciences, now the Lyles College of Engineering. And I've stayed at Fresno State working at the California Water Institute. And I'm also, for many years, I've been on the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. I'm the chair of that board currently. So in both of these roles, I've seen a lot of interaction that is shows the need for broadband. Certainly the connectivity is very important. I liked the bit about being able to study it at home and having the internet at home. We had that issue with many of our students, and particularly those in rural areas. And while it's not the topic of what I'm talking about today, when you said that, it hit home. It's a very important aspect of what we're trying to do here. I'm talking about some common operational attributes requiring broadband. The Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is one of the programs within the administered by the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. It has a good part of the farmers within this region, which comprises 40% of the state of California, as a member of a coalition, and we have a number of coalitions that look at water quality, and that's our role, water quality, whether it be in surface water or groundwater. The focus on this regulatory program, though, is very heavily focused more and more on groundwater. And regulators, unfortunately, need data to be able to operate their programs, and this means that we're asking for reports, and those reports go from the individual grower to the coalition to which they belong, and then data comes to us. And this places a burden on the grower. Particularly, this is a new program. Well, it's relatively new. It started a little over a decade ago, but it certainly is not like in times past. My first job in this world, my father gave it to me when he gave me a shovel and pointed to the field, told me to go out, that I was going to be the chief irrigator. And I experienced, I got a lot of good knowledge at a very early age. I learned that it takes a long time and a lot of water if you've got a sand strip through your field. Certainly the fields that we farm, and that was in this valley, I might add, oftentimes the soil has great variability, and soil types have great variability across the soil, across the farm, I should say. And it's an important part of what I'm talking about here. If with broadband and with the kind of sensors that were just discussed, we can gather this data more efficiently. But this data is not just for the regulatory agency, because what we're focused on is best management practices. Best management practices mean that you're going to be maximizing net profit from your practices, if in fact you do practice good nutrient management and water management. You know, I've seen this from a number of growers. As an example of that is a tour I was given by the Almond Board, and I was truly amazed at what those folks were doing. This was a little bit east of Galt, some orchards that I visited there. Of course, they had broadband. They had meteorological stations scattered at critical points throughout their fields. They had the soil moisture sensors, and they were doing a lot more than that, leaf tissue analysis and all of this, gathering an awful lot of data that went into their computers. They couldn't have done what they're doing now, say 30, 40 years ago. The technology just wasn't there. So the other thing we're talking about is how to handle an awful lot of data, and you want to collect this data in real time, and how to crunch that data and have the algorithms available to you so that you can better operate your farm. To maximize your farm, you're going to be getting the best use of your water. You're going to be minimizing the amount of nutrients that you're using, and this helps your bottom line. So it adds to the net profit of the farm, but it also helps to protect water quality. And I might just add in passing, we recognize that to operate an irrigation system, you have to move salts out of the root zone. So there is going to be some water going below the root zone. That's another program I'm involved with, is Central Valley Salts. And we're going to see some basin plan amendments on that soon that I think will help a lot of the farm community in the long run. So why does this relationship exist, which is another line I have up there? The fact that we can have big computers, but unless you can feed those computers with data in the most efficient manner, it really doesn't do us much good. These data needs relate to many operational factors that make today's agriculture operation more efficient and more profitable, but also at the same time more environmentally friendly. This wasn't possible, as I mentioned, a few decades ago. So today we're able to, with the tools we have at our available to us, as long as we have broadband, we can have very good control of nutrient use, very efficient use of applied irrigation water. One of the things that I noted that the almond growers were doing, and they could only do it with data, was they were stopping the application of the water and nutrients at a critical point in the growth cycle of the nut as it was ending its growth cycle, and they basically stressed the tree. And the purpose of this was to crack the hull that's around the almond. It made the almond easier to strip that hull off while it's being processed. And of course, this adds to less cost for the production of the almond, adds to the bottom line. So the end effect, or the net effect of good nutrient and water management is a better outcome for the grower, and also good protection of groundwater. We go to the next slide, please. This is actually Gabe Yahtzee's slide is much better than this one. This is a bunch of words, and he had some real good examples up there, and I'm covering most of what he had, but this is just a very short list of the data services facilitated by broadband. And as I point out here, the micrometeorological data, the soil moisture data as a function of soil depth is extremely important, because you need good feedback. We've gone to drip irrigation or micro sprinklers as a way to better irrigate more efficiently our fields, but they require O&M. We need to have flow data on what's going into that line. If there is a problem with that line, if there's a breakdown in that line, we can see that if we have the data. From my university job, we visited fields where they haven't carried out good O&M. They don't have the data that they have a problem, but all you need to do is walk out in their field, and you'll see that they'll have trees that are not getting enough water. They're wasting water, and they're paying for that water, and they're taking away from their bottom line. So with good data, as I saw, good practices, as I saw care of thanks to the almond board, this doesn't happen. Of course, well levels, we're talking about sigma. It's on everybody's mind now as we enter the era of sustainable groundwater management. And this is one example of being able to look at your well levels as a function of time. Certainly, another big program that we're attempting to get off the ground, this is not the regional board, this is the State of California Department of Water Resources, but it's groundwater recharge. because if you go look at our river channels, they're not very big. I grew up in a time when we didn't have a lot of dams, and what happened was there was flooding. And in fact, the first dams that went in were basically for flood control. And out of that came water supplies for cities and for farms, power generation, and down the road, recreation and environmental values were assigned to those dams and reservoirs. But when we started managing our water, we forgot that flooding also had associated with it groundwater recharge. We think about the damage, but the other hand, we were getting groundwater recharge. We have to bring that value back, and we're working hard at it today. But once again, you need data to see how much good this is doing. You need to be able to manage the total system. And I'd like water in the ground much better than behind a dam, but we need it behind the dam if we're going to put it in the ground, I realize. But behind the dam, I lose 6 feet a year minimum to evapotranspiration, or to evaporation. And that's water lost. So, and then I'll end up talking about drones and equipment management, but both from the satellites and the drones, we get a lot of good information, but what excites me today is some of the things that we can do with drones, whether they be land-based or air-based, if you will. One of the applications I found real interesting was one farmer who was working on, and he was using land-based drones that ran up and down his rows, but being able to watch the health of his trees. Because if he picked up an infestation, he could go out and treat a tree or several trees in an area and be able to avoid finding he had an infestation when it was throughout his total planting of trees. And he saved a lot of money, he got better production, and overall, all the outcomes were good by being able to have this information. Tractors, well, it's amazing what's happening today. I see the future tractor driver sitting in a room somewhere, probably operating several tractors at one time. Of course, he has a computer screen, or she has a computer screen, that's being watched as these tractors go up and down the road or perform whatever task they're supposed to have. So this all takes data services. Those tractors can't operate unless you have broadband. And I see the future as the typical farm worker is going to have the technical ability to be able to operate in this kind of an environment. Might point out one last comment. A graduate of my college decided he got an engineering degree, but decided he wanted to go back to farming. And he ended up being a raisin grower in the Madera area, and I visited his farm as a dean. You go out and visit people because you want to keep your alums happy. You know, you have these campaigns. You've probably gotten the phone calls, you know, we love you, and please remember us and send in some money. Another thing I've done in my life, which probably wasn't one of the most enjoyable things, except meeting the people was always enjoyable. And he took me into his field and showed me where he'd laser leveled the field. Before this was a general practice for raisin growers. And he put in and in fact invented a machine to be able to harvest the raisins. And he was growing the raisins on the overhead trellises, if you will. And he'd had somewhere about 150 folks on his farm during harvest season in the past. And with his changed operation, he had 5 permanent workers. He picked up 2 part-timers during the harvest season. A big difference. So if you're going to be part of that group that's working on the farm, in that kind of an environment, I might point out he also had drip irrigation with all the soil sensors way back before it was popular. If you're going, he loved going to Switzerland in the summertime, and he'd run his irrigation off of a computer in Switzerland, which to me was pretty neat. You're hearing about this about 1990. If you're going to live in this kind of an environment, you're going to have not only broadband and not only powerful computers, but you're going to have people, the people resources that have the ability to work and operate in this environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor. Great.